Hope everyone is back to the seat. With this, we are coming to this. We are going to start the second day, second session. So we have with us Steve Matthew, who is an agile coach with a leading IT company. He's going to talk about, are you really using a minimal viable product, MVP? So before starting the session, let me thanks our founding sponsor, Innovation Roots. Innovation Roots is a leading consulting and training service provider, helping organizations to achieve business agility and beyond. It is one of the leaders and pioneer of niche publishing services and well known for content collaboration with global thought leaders, authors, and creators. For more details, visit www.innovationroots.com. Do's and don'ts. For every session, join the event 5 minutes before the start time. Use high quality speakers and headphones for better sound quality. Please keep your microphones muted and video disabled, as this may cause disturbance and bandwidth issue. Questions will be taken via chat box. Please enter your questions there. At the end of the sessions, the facilitator or moderator will help and read out a few questions to the speakers as per the available time. Please fill in the feedback forms after the event to help us understand more about the event management. We appreciate your cooperation. With this, I would like to welcome Steve. Over to you, Steve. Thank you.
So thank you for having me here. My name is Steve Matthew. I am an agile coach, and I've been practicing agile coach for almost 8 years now. I've been more focused on lean and process improvement initiatives at the beginning of my career, and essentially from there I grew into a software development role. I worked in software development for a very brief period, and circumstances kind of like pulled me into different directions, and slowly I started working on Scrum teams, and from there I worked as a Scrum Master, and eventually now I'm working as an Agile coach and working at the enterprise level, working with leaders and also also with teams as needed. In between, what I do is I come and give back to the community because I believe that the community has taught me a lot. I used to attend a lot of these sessions, and I used to be very active on the forums, and that allowed me to learn and unlearn a lot of things that I initially got from real life experience. So I'm taking this opportunity to give back to the community, and that's the reason why I'm really here. So in the spirit of that, I wanted to talk about the topic today. Are you really using an MVP? The reason I chose this topic is because I've seen that this concept is used quite often, and many times the context is very different. Different people say different things about MVPs, and I was like, okay, are we all talking the same thing here when we talk about MVP, or are we using different definitions based on something else? So I thought, why not present this topic and also share what I learned in the process of presenting this topic, or as I dug a little deep into this topic. So MVP, as if you guys are not familiar with, is minimum viable product. And minimum viable product is a concept that originated from or became more famous with the book The Lean Startup by Eric Ries. Now, because it deals with lean, because it deals with startup, because it deals with product development, the first thing that I'd like for us as a group to do is to understand what a product is. Let's baseline our understanding of what a product is. And so my first activity here is, what's a product? For this, I'm going to open up a section on the mural called What is a Product? And we'll take around 5 minutes over here. And what we'll do is I want you guys to, I've put some stickies over there for you to interact with, but you can add more stickies if you need. So go, once you access the mural, let me see if I can bring you all here. So if you go, are you just out of curiosity, are you able to see my mural by any chance? No, right? Okay. So let me share that. Okay. So you guys should be able to see my mural. What I want you to do is if you go to the outline over here, you should be able to select what is a product, and there you can interact with the stickies. So just put in your thoughts on what is a product. So we'll give 5 minutes for this, and we will then debrief on that. Just a quick question, everybody's able to access it, right? Because I see a few people, but I'm not sure if everybody's able to access, so I just want to check if everybody is able to see this. Okay, so I've summoned everybody to the section that okay, looks like we have the maximum entries here. I'm seeing that the activity has stalled, so um, I guess we can just go and have a quick debrief. So let me bring you to my next screen here. Oh, looks like someone's still typing. Okay, so give that person a chance. Okay, all right. So I think we have enough entries. So let's have a debrief. Um, so I see that in the chat, a couple of entries are there. Product is a result of an act or a process. Okay. So some of the entries we have here is it solves a problem. It adds value to our lives. It adds value to a customer. It is a need. It's something that can generate revenue. Solves the need of a customer. Okay, same as solves a problem. Satisfies a customer need. So looks like there's some common themes are there. Makes which helps ease my work. Okay, an idea turned into reality. Okay, so that's and I see this last one entry over here also is similar. So many of these things are actually correct. The shared understanding here is that it satisfies a customer need. I also like the idea of an idea turned into reality. In fact, we are going to talk about this in our next section. Um, so let's look at what a product is and what are some of the key characteristics I've identified when you talk about what is a product. So the first thing is um, a product is anything, whether it be goods or services, whether it is physical or maybe it is intangible, that delivers value. Number one. Number one characteristic of a product is that it delivers value. Number two, a product has a defined boundary. It cannot just be any random thing. It has a defined boundary. For example, you have a car or an aircraft, or if it's like a computer, all these are defined boundaries. It is basically, it cannot go beyond that. It serves a specific need. So these are the boundaries of the product. Then we have it addresses a need. As you all rightly said, a product addresses some need. And finally, a product has known stakeholders or customers. Um, when I say known stakeholders, I want to clarify that it could be both people who make the product, so the sellers. It could also be the buyers as well. So there's someone who's selling a product and someone who is willing to pay money and buy the product also. But in certain cases, it's not always necessary about selling and buying, but it's also something about satisfying an internal need. So internal stakeholders and internal users could also be a factor there. That's why I said known stakeholders. Now, one thing that I did not put on the screen is that a product can also be an experiment. Okay, I did not see this answer in any of the stickies in the group activity, but an experiment can actually result into a product. So these are some of the things that I wanted to keep in mind, or for us to keep in mind as we move through the presentation. So the next thing that we'll talk about is some general steps of product development. So when I researched about product development, and let me switch my screen again. So when we talk about product development, okay, I did some research on what are the different steps that involves product development. And what I realized is that there are, depending on different bodies of knowledge, there are different steps. So I found that these 7 steps essentially cover traditional product development or the different phases of product development. And it starts from, an idea generation. So someone mentioned in the stickies that, an idea turned into reality. So product development or stages of development starts with an idea and it goes through a screening process where, the idea is vetted. Then it is, a concept is developed, tested. Then there is business analysis. There's the actual product development. There's testing. And then finally, there's commercialization and launch. So if you go through the typical steps of product development, it essentially goes through all these steps before a final product is a final product or a consumer version is available. But where does MVP fall into this picture, and why do we need MVP is again the question, right? If we have a set of steps that we can use for product development, and the answer is that when the concept of MVP or minimum viable product started with startups. So startups are not essentially startups basically have low funding and generally low budgets. They are usually working on very tight budgets. They cannot, and the amount of mistakes that they can afford is also very less, because if they make something very expensive and it fails, then typically the startup will tank essentially. And statistically, I don't know if you guys research this, but statistically, many startups fail. So to tackle that, to rather than going through the traditional process of all these steps and building an expensive product and then realizing that customers don't want it, that is when you want to use a minimum viable product. So in the book Lean Startup, Eric Ries talks about this phase: build, measure, and learn. So this build, measure, and learn is a quick feedback loop, and essentially what they're saying is that when you have an idea, you want to immediately build it using, you want to bring that idea into fruition by, or test that idea using an MVP. So when you enter the build phase, you're using an MVP, and then after you create that MVP, you are going to measure it. You're going to measure whether this product is actually leading to real progress, whether it is satisfying the demand, whether it is satisfying a particular use. Are we going in the right direction? And then finally, based on that measurements or based on those actionable metrics, you're going to learn, you're using actionable metrics to learn whether you need to continue or not. So what he describes is that when you go through an MVP is something that has to go through this full cycle. So after you go through this full cycle, you will probably come to a decision. Do you want to pivot or do you want to continue? Pivot meaning you either are deciding to change your strategy or maybe completely abandoning the product. Persevere meaning you will continue working on the product or you continue spending money on product development. So this is what the build, measure, feedback loop is. And this is important for us because before we dive into the next area, we need to understand that this is where the roots of minimum viable product is coming from. So the next thing that I want you to do as a group is, what is your current understanding of minimum viable product? Again, I'm going to bring you all into the mural. On the mural, I'm going to open the section for what is your understanding of minimum viable product? I'm going to summon you all to that section, and then I'll share my screen. So what we want to do here is we want to spend 5 minutes here, and what I'd like for the audience to do is use the stick keys and note down what is your current understanding of minimum viable product based on what you have experienced in your organizations, in your real life, or what you understand. What is your knowledge as far as minimum viable product is? So we'll give 5 minutes here, and then we'll move on. Is everybody able to locate that? Okay. I see that one person is there. Okay, looks like people have stopped putting in notes. So at this point, I'm not going to debrief on this. There's a reason for that. What I'm going to do is there's one more question I'd like to ask you guys, and that is um, using all these that you have added over here. The next question that I want you to answer is, what is the difference between minimum viable product, minimum marketable feature, and minimum marketable product? So if you go on to the outline, it is outline number 9. I'll summon you over here to that outline. Keeping all the above inputs in mind, I just want you to answer, I want you to capture your notes on what is the difference between minimum viable product, minimum marketable feature, and minimum marketable product. We'll spend some 5 minutes over here as well. So, Manish, I see that you're putting some comments in chat. Do you want me to add your comments into the stickies? Okay. I'm not seeing any more inputs onto the mural. Okay, I think people are thinking, so I'll wait for that. But just to keep the time check, we have around 2 minutes left for this activity. Okay, we just have under a minute left. Okay, cool. Time's up. So let's have a quick debrief and discuss on these two topics. So the first thing that I asked you guys was, okay, what is a minimum viable product? What is your understanding of a minimum viable product? And what is the difference between minimum viable product, minimum marketable feature, and minimum marketable product? Minimum marketable product. Okay, that's just a mouthful, and as I say it, it sounds confusing to me also. So so let's look at some of the things here. So the understanding of what is a minimum viable product. So product that has must-have features and is usable. Okay, smallest piece of feature which can be released, vertically sliced story. Okay, vertically sliced independent story which can be add value. Most needed features. Okay, solves main purpose of the product. Okay, minimum features that can be used for seeking feedback. I like this one. And MVP must address the features which are must-have for the customer. Okay, so the so the minimum viable product is actually close. This row with the sticky note essentially has come to the closest understanding of what a minimum viable product is. Essentially, it is the bare minimum amount of features that can be used for seeking feedback. Now, you may ask me a question. Okay, so I also put that product has must-have features and is usable. Why is this different from that? So the difference is actually because the last two words, seeking feedback. If you're only creating a minimum set, if you're only taking a minimum set of features and releasing it, that is not essentially a minimum viable product. So the definition of minimum viable product, I have a slide that I cannot show now because I'm presenting on Miro, but the definition of minimum viable product essentially is, according to Eric Ries, is that version of the product that enables a full turn of the build, measure, learn loop with a minimum amount of effort and least amount of development time. So this answer over here, minimum features that can be used for seeking feedback, is also slightly incomplete, but it is the closest to what a minimum viable product is. When you talk about a minimum viable product, it is a, a it is something that can go through that build, measure loop as fast as possible. So the key things to remember there is minimum amount of effort and the least amount of development time. That is the key thing. So you're using that minimum amount of effort and time so that you can build something, measure whether it is actually leading to progress, learn from that, and then repeat that cycle. So as you continue to repeat that cycle, you are actually reducing risk, reducing money spent, the amount of money spent on the product development, and identifying certain things like, is this the right product that we need to build? And that is what a minimum viable product addresses. So here, there is a key thing. I saw that a lot of things, a good discussion can happen over here. And again, after, if you want to take questions, you can do it towards the end, or if you have a burning question, I can answer a couple maybe over here. But here I saw that, someone like MMF is MVP, or MMF is, I can see here that basic purpose of the product. So these are all somewhere, these are, I would say, the way sometimes it is talked about in the industry, but MMF and MMP are almost the same. The MMF, what MMF is essentially is that it is a minimum feature for which the customer will pay something. So that is something that you're releasing towards the end. So let me look at what a good definition for MMF is. So an MMF is essentially a small self-contained feature that can be developed quickly and it delivers value to the customer. So typically when we talk about MVP in some contexts, and again, like I said, in some organizations, these terms are used interchangeably. Most of the time when we are talking about MVP in the industry, we are actually talking about MMF. So typically so if you're using, I mean, if you're using Scrum, you will say that, an increment is coming at the end. Maybe that is an MVP. Or I've seen this very commonly in my personal experience that when you are when you're using the SAFe framework for building things, typically I've heard that at the end of the at the end of the program increment, you are building an MVP. But is it really an MVP or is it an MMF or is it an MMP? Because MMF and MMP are typically the same. They're almost synonyms. They're almost the same. You can say that a slight difference is that minimum marketable feature is just a feature and minimum marketable product is an actual product. So if just the feature is going to make a product, then it is MMF. Or if it is already an existing product, you're just adding a new feature, it is a minimum marketable feature. But the difference between MVP and MMF lies in that critical fact that you want to take the least amount of time and effort, and it helps in validated learning. This is the critical difference. If there is no validated learning, if there is no hypothesis that you are, testing, then most likely it is not an MVP. An MVP is essentially to test an assumption, a critical assumption whether what you're doing is right or wrong. That is the real purpose of an MVP. The intention behind MVP, when it was described in Eric Ries's book, The Lean Startup, it was essentially that to test an idea, quickly see if this is where the direction you want to go, and if not, pivot or continue with it. Now, I constantly say pivot or persevere. What that essentially means is that maybe, someone mentioned here that MVP is same as a proof of concept. See, you can, yeah, I can see how that is closely related. Again, assuming that a proof of concept will help you measure and learn, as long as it goes to that build, measure, learn feedback loop, then MVP is the same as POC. So you have to be very careful when you define something, because sometimes in certain organizations, what they call an MVP is, a set of features that are released. I've also seen some big consultants or consulting agencies saying the same thing, that when you use a set of features that you release at the end of the PI, or a set of features that you selected for a release is MVP. So if your organization is using that definition, then continue to use that definition. But what the focus of this talk today here is that MVP is essentially to test whether you are really going in the direction that you want, whether you're building the right product or not. And so now I'll switch back to my presentation. We'll just read through that definition, and I'll also go through some of the things as to why we're using MVP and stuff. So just give me a minute here. Let me just switch screens. So just a recap. So this is for those who can. So the MVP is that version of the product that enables a full turn of the build measure loop with a minimum amount of effort and the least amount of development time. So this is from the Lean Startup. That is actually this is the exact sentence from the book. So what an MVP is not, and so this is what we were discussing. It is not just about creating minimal products. A minimum product is not an MVP. A minimum product is not an MVP. If you're thinking that, oh, I'll put only one or two features and I'll put it into the customer's hands, that's an MVP. It's not. Again, it is not an MVP because you need to use an MVP to learn and then iterate using that learning. The real purpose is to gather learning, to gather feedback. That is the only reason you're using an MVP. It is to get that feedback. So it is not a minimal. It is not a minimal product. That is a misconception. It is not a partial product. Just like so. It's like I said. I've seen in some organizations where you go through a PI, you build MVP, and they say this is MVP 1, and after that they build MVP2, which is basically MVP1 plus MVP2, or they're building on top of that. So they know exactly what they're building. It's just partial product. That is also not an MVP. Similarly, it is not just a set of features selected for a release. It is not a minimum marketable feature, or it is not a minimum marketable product. And finally, it is not, sometimes you might also hear the definition that, it is a defect, it is a product with some defects, it's not exactly quality tested, that is an MVP. No, that is not true. Quality does matter, because you're putting this minimum version into the hands of the customer, and in certain cases of MVPs, if it has the potential to cause harm, then that is not something you want to put into the hands of the customer. So quality does matter, but the amount or the context or what you need to do varies. So for example, a quick example is that if I want to test a medical product as an MVP, then of course quality has to matter, it cannot harm the patient. But if it is something as simple as a website, I don't need to worry about the font or the graphics or things like that if I'm using a landing page as an MVP. And so I'm going to talk about that also, so you might get some ideas of what an MVP is, or what are some of the different techniques you can use for MVP. So why use an MVP? So as I mentioned, it is to avoid building something that nobody wants. As I mentioned, this comes from lean and from lean startup thinking. You want to build something that uh, does not cost you too much, or you want to make sure that you're building the right things so that there will be customers, and eventually, as a result of this MVP, it will generate revenue. But to answer Vishal's question, should MVP generate revenue or feedback only? That's a good question. I'll answer that right now. The goal of MVP is to get feedback. On the other hand, when you talk about a minimum marketable feature or a minimum marketable product, the goal is to get revenue. That is also another critical difference. Okay. So what else? So it is to maximize learning for every dollar spent with the least amount of effort. Use the advantage of speed. So when you focus on building an MVP, you are also looking at how fast you can get something out there so that you can get feedback. Now, a good example I can tell you from my own development days is, like when I'm writing code, sometimes the best way to write code, or you don't want to use hard-coded values, but hard-coded values are easy. If I want to test something quickly, I can just put a hard-coded value, I can test whether this is right, and I can move on. If it is right, I can refactor my code and then use a configuration file or whatnot. Now, that I don't want to confuse that with an MVP. I'm just saying that the same logic applies when you're talking about using the advantage of speed. So sometimes you might incur technical debt when you build an MVP. The reason you're incurring technical debt is because you're using a strategy where you are looking for speed. Incur technical debt, check, build, measure, learn, and then finally refactor. That is the reason why, another reason why you're using MVP. Similarly, to reduce waste, as I mentioned, reduce cost, risk, and time spent, and it helps you decide whether you want to continue with the product or not. So one critical assumption again with MVP is that when you use an MVP, you must be in a position to abandon the product if it is not doing what you are expecting it to do. There is no point in spending lots of money or tons of money building an end-to-end product and finally putting it in the hands of the customer, and the customer says, well, this is not, I'm not going to pay for this. So rather than doing that, you can use different strategies to check whether you're going in the right direction, and based on feedback, you can iterate and continue to build. And sometimes you might build something and you realize that, doing anything about this is actually a waste. You can actually stop. That is where you pivot. That is where you change your strategy, or you stop product development altogether. So these are some of the best case examples of how to use an MVP. So what are the different types of MVP techniques? Now, initially, when I went into this topic, I realized that I thought that there were only a couple of ways to do MVP, but here I'm going to here I've listed, like, four different techniques of how to use MVP. In fact, MVP itself is a technique, but within MVP itself, you have multiple techniques. I also learned that there is something called as low fidelity and high fidelity MVP techniques. I'm not covering that because I didn't want to go into that much detail. But I thought, okay, I'll explain some concepts as to what a piecemeal MVP is, what a video MVP is, or what a concierge MVP is, because these are some of, I think, some of the critical or there are good examples of some of these MVPs in real life that you guys can relate to. So, for example, a piecemeal MVP is defined as something where you're using a bunch of existing products to build a new product. A good example from my personal experience, what I've seen is a company called Spanx. I don't know if you've heard the story of Spanx and how this person called Sarah Blakely developed a product for women. So that concept, basically, she used an existing product to build an idea where whether women would actually buy that, company buying that product, and she built a large empire of it. Spanx, I would encourage you to just go and check the story of that. So that is a good example of a piecemeal MVP. A landing page MVP is very common. So in my days when I was working for a banking for a bank, one way we tested a landing page MVP was basically uh, when a customer logs into their account, we developed a feature where they can toggle on or off, locking their credit card. Now, initially, when we did that, when the person clicks on it, the next thing that happens is, okay, this feature is being built. If you're interested, give us your feedback, and we'll notify you when this thing comes on. So that is a good example of landing page MVP. Video MVP is something where you don't have the actual product. You have created a simulation or something very close to what it's supposed to deliver, but you're creating a small video presentation and you're showing it to your customers or to your potential audience, and you're checking if people will actually put money into it. In fact, there's one more type of MVP called physical MVP, and in that, what happens is that you have an actual physical product, and you can actually show what it looks like. Very similar to, you can combine it with a video MVP, and you can try to see if there are early adopters to it. This is a good example of how crowdfunding works or certain pre-orders work. So a good example of mixing two different techniques of MVP. And then a concierge MVP. In a concierge MVP, what is happening is that you have the opportunity to automate something, an end-to-end process, but you are not spending that much money to automate it, but you are putting a front end, getting something done, and then you're manually processing it in the back end. So this is the idea of a concierge MVP. And again, the reason is basically to reduce cost and also to test whether people will actually, go ahead with your idea, or whether that's actually something that will serve any good. So I want to talk about the story of Zappos. I don't know if you guys know the story of Zappos. Quite famous. So uh, Nick Swinmurn was the founder of, or the person who created Zappos. Okay, and his story is that um, he was actually frustrated with the fact that there was no online site where he had a good selection of shoes that he could buy. So what he did is he ran an experiment. His hypothesis was that people are willing and ready to buy shoes online. So okay, so people are willing to, how do you test that? So what he did is he went to a local shoe store. He took some pictures of their inventory, and he promised them that if he has to buy the shoes in exchange for taking those pictures, then he will buy from them at full price. So then he created a website. He put these pictures on the website. He does not have the actual product. He does not have any order management system. He just has a simple front end, and he posts it online so that customers will browse through that page and see if somebody would actually place an order. When a customer actually placed an order, he would go to the store, buy that same shoe, and then manually ship it out to the customer. And he was doing this until a point where obviously his success was, quite high, and obviously he could not continue with doing the manual method. So that gave him the idea that, okay, my idea, my assumption that people are willing to buy shoes online is correct, and so I should continue investing in this product or in this service, and I should build further technology or further capability to automate the end-to-end process. So this was the MVP used in this case was concierge MVP, because the front end was there was earlier front end, the back end stuff was all manual, where there was opportunity to automate. So this is a simple example of how you can use an MVP and test certain things. So yeah, I mean, based on this, I don't know if you guys have got any new insights. My goal here was to essentially talk about what an MVP is and how MVP differs from some commonly misunderstood terms. Many times I hear that minimum marketable feature, or the people don't use minimum marketable feature, but what they reference to is MVP. I've also heard people using MVP in the right context, but I want to kind of like take the stage to say that essentially in your context, always make sure what the definition of MVP is, and look at whether it is really an MVP or not. So I'll leave you with the question: are you guys really using an MVP in your organization? And you can go back and find out if it is really an MVP or if it is something else. So with that, I'm at the end of my presentation. I would love to, open the stage for questions, and I'd also like you guys to, share anything that you guys have learned new as a result of this, and if there's any room for me to improve.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you for this particular insightful session. So we have a couple of questions.
Okay.
Vishal Garg wants to understand, should MVP generate revenue or feedback only?
Yeah, I did answer that question. Should MVP generate feedback or generate revenue or feedback? The primary goal of MVP is to generate feedback. It has to go through that build, measure, learn cycle, as I mentioned. And the goal is two things. One, measuring, are you going in the right direction? If you're not going in the right direction, learning why you're not going in the right direction, continuing that iteration, making tweaks as necessary, continuing that iteration, measuring and learning. So in short, yes, it is to measure and learn. But MMP, or minimum marketable product or minimum marketable feature, their goal is to generate revenue. Does that answer your question?
I hope it answered Vishal's question. With respect to the time, we'll just take one more question. Can minimal business increment be used with continuous software product development with MMR, MMF, or MVP terminology? By Manish.
Minimum business increment. I don't know what a minimum business increment is also. Is it so? Okay, here's the litmus test. Okay, I don't know what the question is asking for, but if you want to know whether it is an MVP, ask yourself this question: did you do the work? Are you going to do the work in the shortest amount of time with the least amount of development effort? And will you learn the most out of that? Now, see, as I say that, one thing I want to say is that it depends again on your context, because if you have more money to fund, you might be able to create a little bit more expensive MVP. Okay, the goal of MVP is not always about reducing cost. The goal is to get maximum learning possible. But if you follow the simple guideline that is it done with the least amount of effort and the least amount of time, basically a lazy approach to get knowledge, then most likely you're on the track of MVP.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Thank you for staying so late and delivering this session. On behalf of the Agile Network India community, I would like to thank you once again, and
yeah,
I hope our audience had their good learning time.
if people want to connect with me on LinkedIn, they can. I'm just trying to get
Yeah,
my LinkedIn URL.
yeah, we will share Steve's.
Oh, got
Yeah,
it. Okay, thank you.
LinkedIn has been shared. You can connect Steve on LinkedIn. Thank you very much. With this, we come to the
Thank
end of the second session. Thank you, Steve.